We're shifting into a new paradigm. The world is moving away from living in survival and learning how to thrive. We're shedding everything we have been conditioned to believe and creating a new reality as we uncover the truth within us. The truth is in our bodies, in connection with our sexuality. With this comes change in the way we approach intimacy in all of our relationships. The New Paradigm Intimacy podcast is here to support you to understand how we can better experience sex, love, and connection. Each episode, we will be sharing the voices of leaders who are supporting the shift in the new paradigm by harnessing the power of sexual energy so that you can experience your deepest pleasure and all of your aliveness. Okay, welcome listeners and audiences. Thank you so much for coming. This is Elizabeth. I'm the director of the Institute New Paradigm Intimacy. And today on our podcast, we have upcoming guest facilitator, Jon Eden Khan. And thank you so much for coming, Jon.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Yes. And I'm going to let Jon go ahead and introduce himself as we begin to explore the concept and the theme of sexuality as a threshold to cross. But first, I'll let Jon introduce himself.
Sure. Yeah. So good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me on to spend this time with you. How do I introduce myself? So I'm someone, I really deeply care about human beings uncovering and living the power, the beauty, the sacredness, the love that we are, the real depth and dignity of the human being through everything that we do. So whether that is in relation to building new structures and systems for a different kind of society, which is a major part of what my work focuses on, all the way through to how we raise children or how we make love with each other. You know, these are things that I really care about. So, practically speaking, I mentor what I call soul-driven leaders. So I support the training and evolution of people who are learning to lead from the purpose and the love and the creativity that wants to come through their soul. I co-lead an international spiritual community called AVATARA, where we support people in the awakening of their body and their soul and their spirit so that they can find their place in this extraordinary global initiatory time. And I also have initiated an emerging transnational political party called Singularity, which is dedicated to a radically different type of politics that starts with the one sacred life that beats in the heart of the earth and through all kingdoms of nature and through all nations and beings and communities. So it's a radical unity-based politics, an adventure in that. So, and what I also have begun doing over the last years as well is I've begun mentoring men around their relationship to their sexuality and their relationship to their body. And that has emerged as I've had my own really powerful journey there and have been taught deeply by my soul and by my body around what needs to soften in me, to be let go of in me, to be humbled in me so that I can participate in the mysteries of what increasingly I feel sex really is. So yeah, that's a bit on me.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you do and the work that you bring. And yeah, it's very thrilling and exciting and very unctuous, very like just there's so much there. So thank you so much for bringing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And in the speaking of the soul piece and stepping into the soul piece, that's what the theme that we're working in with this cohort is, the threshold. And I've always spoken that sexuality if you look at the realm of self-development, that sexuality is almost this final frontier where people have stepped into and they've done meditation and they have done self-development work. They've worked with psychologists, and there's still like this missing piece. It's like a gap that hasn't been satiated yet. And in my experience and in my work, I feel that sexuality is that last cusp. And while it's not the end of the journey, because it's the crossing of a threshold of a space into a whole nother realm that opens up in the realm of self-development. And that piece, I feel, is very much that deepening into soul and deepening into connection, and that soul initiation piece that sexuality kind of leads you into. And so that's the theme that we're exploring in this upcoming cohort. And in that, people go into the threshold. Some like bumble across with like pure adrenaline and just go straight forward and have no idea what's leading them and are led by a stronger will than their own. And some consciously take this path. And either way, people are drawn to this threshold and cross this threshold. So in that vein, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your crossing of the threshold into sexuality and what that was like for you.
And that's my crossing of the threshold into sexuality as far as my soul journey is concerned.
Yes, if that's what it means to you. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally speak to that. My experience is that when a person gives themselves to their soul, and when I've done that as well, the soul step by step is like, okay, now I want more. Now I want more. Now I want more. And beginning from this, there's an impulse to offer the soul my attention, maybe for a moment. And the soul is kind of like, okay, thanks. And now I'd like some more, and after that, there's an impulse to perhaps offer my attention regularly to my soul, and the soul is happy to receive that. But over time, in my experience, the soul just wants more and more, and that is more and more attention, more and more focus. Then it wants more of my activity, and then it wants more of my alignment, and then it actually wants to start pouring through into my relationship life and make sure that what I'm doing in my relationship life actually is aligned with my soul. And I would agree with you that as it gets deeper and deeper, at a certain point, it says it wants my sexuality, and then it also wants my money, and it wants, what I do with my money and what I don't do with my money, and where I live and how I treat my body and all of these things. So yeah, and my experience of that is that the thresholds of that being consumed more and more deeply into a life that is lived from our soul can be deeply humbling, particularly in the places where we've built strong identities, and where I noticed that in myself, in my own journey. I think my crossing a threshold into my soul really teaching me and my body really teaching me in sexuality happened maybe 8 years ago or so, when my partner at the time and myself began exploring open relationship. And we'd been in a relationship for 3 years by that point, and it had been monogamous. Even though some deep instinctual part of me always knew that it was going to go that way. And I was terrified, utterly terrified. And I subconsciously had picked a woman as well who was actually totally built to be able to go into that world. And, even though I claimed that was absolutely not what I wanted, some deeper part of me knew that I needed to take that journey. And I don't say this from the perspective of being someone who's some kind of advocate for open relating. I'm not, but it was something that was important for me in my journey at a particular point. And that was also because I felt like I had to face certain areas of deep insecurity within myself. I knew that would trigger some of my deepest terrors and my deepest traumas, which I had worked on for about 5 years in kind of talking therapy scenarios, and kind of moved about that much, and it was playing out and causing issues in my relationship. And the relationship was at a kind of make or break point. And I knew on my side, in terms of what I needed to take responsibility for, I needed to face myself there. And it also became something to do with the ethic of love that felt true to me. But when we crossed that threshold relationally, it started to bring up so much vulnerability in me, in our sexuality, that I was not able to be the performer that I had been prior to this. And it was profoundly confrontational for what I realized was a program I developed, which was, am I allowed to swear on here? I think I'm probably allowed to swear on here, right? Yeah. As long as my woman is well fucked, then I'm safe. Right. You know, as long as my woman is well fucked, then she's not going to leave me. Which is obviously covering over a deep level of insecurity and a lack of self-worth in me. And I felt just these deep level vulnerabilities that were sourced in my own old attachment trauma and from much, younger areas of my development that were coming up in my sexuality. And suddenly I wasn't able to make sure my woman was well fucked, and it was terrifying to me, like utterly terrifying. Because suddenly my safety strategy was not there, and it's just me, and there was some really, really painful months there. But what it demanded of me was that I started to just listen to my body, and it took me about 3 months to get to a point where I just fully surrendered and gave up my agendas to be a performance machine in some way, and committed myself to, okay, I'm just going to listen to my body. And I realized that my body's stronger than me here, actually. And I need to listen to the deepest subtleties of my yes and my no and my opening and my closing and the flows of emotion that were moving in me. And I needed to take responsibility for myself in such a way that I make myself transparent, and that if I'm showing up in a erotic encounter with my partner then or someone else, that I'm someone who's bringing an authentic, transparent human being into connection as an offering, and also an interest and attunement in who are you and what's happening for you, and then we see how we flow together, rather than me having some agenda around being something, in this encounter. And when I came to that, it started to, beautiful domains started to open in my sexuality, and I also just learned more and more deeply the places in my own body and the places in the body of the person that I was with that would only open when love was really there. And I came increasingly to have the experience that there are places in our bodies that don't actually really open for anything less than that. I found that pretty wondrous, actually, to realize that there were places in my own body and other people's bodies that remember the frequency of pure love. And that can flow with wild primal animal energies and all sorts of other frequencies. But that love as the foundation opens doorways because the body remembers that and is tolerating. My experience was like that my body would tolerate less frequencies than lower frequencies than that, for earlier periods of my life, but really with a part of it being like, okay, I'm waiting for you to be able to get clear in your consciousness around just what a sacred thing I am and what I'm really built for. And so we can actually do what I'm built for, and, I learned that deeply the first time that I had a woman touch my cock, from a place that was deeply, where she was anchored in her soul and in her body, and she was touching me from a place that was fully honoring of that sacred presence and sacred life force in my body. And the way that my body responded was something I'd never experienced before. There was a presence and a life force and an intelligence that started to rise in my body that showed me what my body's made for. And so, and I remember it was a funny thing then, and I still have a part of it now where it's softer now. But then if there was any agenda in sexuality that would show up. Even when, I remember once with my partner at the time, we were eating dinner together and we were tuning in on how our day had been and what we'd like to do that evening. And she said, okay, so for me tonight, I want to answer some emails. I want to watch a bit of this series, and then I want to have sex. And I responded in such a way where I was like, immediately I could feel how my body closes when it comes to agenda. Like if there's some agenda, my body's like, we're not, no, it's a no. And so I just let her know, okay, I welcome your impulse, and let's come together and let's see where we are. And we both laughed with each other because of this sense of, I had been more agendaed prior to this whole thing. I had been someone who would say something like that, like, I want this and I want that then, and whilst I celebrate any human being really being clear and connected to their desire, I have learned there's a huge difference between when the mind is telling the body what it should do. And, basically when our sexuality is being filtered through our mind and being filtered through the mind's, like turn-ons around identity and turn-ons around, what I want to be and what I want you to be and what I want to look like, or what I want you to look like, or whatever, all of that. And when there's actually a deep upwelling of sacred life force and power that is this extraordinary mystery of what our sexuality is, that's then bringing our souls into union with each other in a way where our animal bodies are fully participating as well. So I had multiple experiences of like realizing that life and the universe have treasures for us waiting for us to be ready to actually participate in them. And we don't know they exist until we get to until there's something that's landed in me enough, and there's a level of stability of love that's landed in this connection enough, or there's enough trust, or there's enough opening, or enough surrender, or enough attunement. And then suddenly we start to enter into some zone that we've never been before. And it's like, it was always there as possible. It was always there waiting for us, but we didn't know how to go there yet. And so there have been multiple versions of that over the years that I notice over the last year or so, I find myself using the language of, I feel like I am becoming more intimate with the mysteries of what sex really is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your vulnerability in that journey. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have a choice, really. I have a very loud body. Like it's something that my body is extremely. It's not a negotiator. It basically is just very clear. It's like, this isn't happening, or this is happening, and I just do my best to be as gracefully honoring of whatever's going on in the process.
I hear you. And in that piece and in your sharing of the breaking down of the identity and the personality and the stepping into that soul connection and following it through sexuality, I would love to go into that small part where there was it's like the crux and the humbling and the humility of that one part where your ego begins to crack, where that identity begins to crack, because that is the threshold, I feel. And but if you get into that point and you pull it out, there's really actually quite a lot in that space.
Yeah. I had someone say to me the other day, I found it a really fascinating thing that I hadn't heard before, but it opened up a whole inquiry for me, that apparently there's research that shows that women have more vulnerability and challenges that come up in sexuality that doesn't feel safe, and men have more challenges and vulnerability that come up in sexuality that does feel safe.
Okay.
And I found that really interesting. And And I think there's something if I just relate to my own experience of being in a male body, I think part of that is that we're taught that we have to be strong in all sorts of different scenarios, and we have to, we're taught to develop armor. All humans are taught to develop armor. And our identities and our ego structures, so much of it is armor. And, I think definitely the first time that I remember there started to be a cracking of that identity structure for me was when I came into a relationship at the very beginning with that woman who I just mentioned, at the very beginning of our relationship, really 3 years earlier. And the depth of the love that was there and that I could feel was the foundation for how I was being met was so confronting to my ego structure in certain ways. It wasn't built for that. It was built for surviving in a world where I'm not loved in that way, and surviving in a world where I'm alone, actually. And that's the story that is running, the structure. And so, I just realized that I could be functional in the world with that kind of armor on. And, and I might even be a bit proud of myself that compared to my earlier, much less functional self, this seems to be going okay, But then being in a circumstance where I don't need to have that armor on, and actually I'm being invited by the very energy that I'm being met with to reveal myself and to be unconditionally held and in a love that is directly confrontational to the fundamental programming and stories that my personality structure is built on, was really challenging.
Right.
It was really challenging. And that happened through our sexuality, and it happened through the love shared between our hearts and our bodies at the beginning of the relationship. And it was destabilizing for me at the beginning. I remember the first month just being like, whoa, I don't know how to find my center here, and, and I've heard a lot of men describe that over the years, that actually certain aspects of their body and their identity are more easily comfortable when there isn't that depth of intimacy, and then when there is such a depth of intimacy, it can be really confronting, and you have to learn a new way. Like you have to go through it. It's one of those things, like you have to, and there's a surrender that is required, because it's not going to work in that context to just build an alternative identity that is like, oh, well, I'm sure I can round this out in some way. It's like, it's not, some other strategy or some technique or something. It's not going to work. You have to surrender and, let yourself be taught by the love that's showing up in your world. And I remember I had that with that woman multiple times, where I felt myself being loved in ways that I'd never been loved before. And I remember there being disorienting moments where I was like, I've not been here before. I don't know where I am right now. Actually, there's a way that I'm receiving love that is a territory that I've not been to before. And, that is fundamentally confronting, I think. And I think if I just speak to the journey of beings in male bodies, to the degree to which I understand that, it really fucks with the wiring. It's really oppositional to everything that you're taught that you need to be in so many ways, even if you've had great parents that are super, that have not promoted the traditional masculine identities. And I went through that. Like I never bought into the traditional masculine stuff as I was growing up. I fundamentally rejected it and believed myself to be pretty free of it, actually, until I started going through these types of journeys in my relating life. And it had me really realize that, I am not as free of this as I thought. I have taken on things collectively. I'm swimming in some ocean of expectation and norms and pressure that I have subconsciously accepted upon myself in some way, that I should be this and I should not be that. And it's, all of it comes down to the core masculine wound, really, which is on that side, which is, you are worthy of love if you perform. That's what makes you worthy of love. If you succeed, if you achieve, if you perform, if you do X, whatever X is in whatever that circumstance is, then you are worthy of love. And that's one of the main critiques I have of a lot of the very prominent figures within the men's world right now. Like Andrew Tate is a really good example of, just like the number of young men who look to someone like Andrew Tate as a beacon of, learning. But really what Andrew Tate and a lot of those guys are doing is their whole thing is based on, well, it can all be okay as long as you just perform the best. As long as you just are the best in your performance, whether in your success, in your achievement, that's how you win this thing. And in a certain sense, it's just a hardening of the masculine armor. It's a hardening of the masculine wound rather than a surrender of it into the experience that, there are extraordinary sacred domains of life force and love that exist on the other side of that surrender. And our masculinity then isn't bolstered by a false sense of identity, but is a function of the life force that's in the male body. So, yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that there's, in that point there, that there's like a trembling?
Oh, for sure.
Right?
Yeah, terror. There's a terror in that.
Right. And that trembling has the terror where it's like, I want to go forward and I want to run away at the same time.
Absolutely. There's a terror. And I've known that terror in myself, like the terror, and it's a terror of abandonment. It's a terror of what's going to happen if I'm not what I think I'm meant to be, is the world that I have accepted the program is how it needs to go. Is that all going to fall apart in some way? Is my connection to intimacy, because we're all, no matter what identities and armor people are wearing, everyone wants intimacy deeply.
Right.
And so there's all sorts of programs that people are running to get the intimacy that they long for. And we believe our programs for a long time. We believe that it works. and it does work on a certain level, but it really doesn't work on a deeper level, most of the time we don't know about that deeper level until it appears. And then there's a choice point.
Right.
And that choice point is, am I willing to surrender into something that's totally unknown? I don't know where it goes. I'm naked. I'm exposed. I've taken my armor off. What do I do then? Is it going to be okay? And that is soul work, in my view. That there is a soul work that is necessary there, because I don't think you can also healthily do that choice, even though for a lot of people, what takes them to the threshold is love. Because sometimes we're willing to go through thresholds because love shows up in our life and says, hey, come please, because it's going to be better if we go here, and sometimes we're willing to do that in a way that we would not be willing to do if that love hadn't shown up. But we cannot make our passage through those thresholds dependent upon the outer love, because then it becomes unhealthy, and there's dynamics that start to play out in the relating which don't go into good places, as probably many of us have learned. I've learned that. I think the continued passage, the continued yes through that threshold has to really be because I want to learn to come from a deeper place. I trust that more love in me, even if it's scary, is something good. And I want to open myself and open my heart and grow in the love that I can stand in, that I can share in, And so I'm a yes, even if it's scary, I think. And that is soul work, because that's not coming from our agendered, identity structured personalities anymore.
Would you like to speak a little bit to what you want to bring to the Institute and what you are going to be speaking on, a little bit more of weaving these veins together?
Yeah, I feel like I've had, as I've been speaking to in this conversation that we've been sharing, I've had my own journey around what is asked of us to release and what is asked in us to cultivate to be really available for extraordinary intimacy and sexuality. And I want to talk about that.
Okay.
You know, yeah, because I feel like, you know, one of those things, for instance, is just the ability to feel truly one's own body, and then to be able to feel through our own body somebody else's body. And to, I think I shared with you before, you know, one of the big transition points for my journey in this was I witnessed in a sacred sexuality temple once, I witnessed my teacher making love with a woman. And there was a transmission that I received that changed my whole sexual life just from witnessing that. And it was, I was able to witness that his body was not moving 1% faster than the true pace of both of their bodies. Not 1%. And sometimes they were moving faster and sometimes they were moving more slowly. But it was very clear. I could feel in my body that there was not 1% something was out in terms of the pace of what the true opening and flow of the energy in the bodies that were connecting felt. And it changed something in me, you know. And I remember I came home and my partner and I, at that time, we made love, and she, you know, she was like, something's different. and it really was. And that's just an example of like, and it's been my commitment in sexuality ever since. One of my primary commitments is never to be attuned. Like, what is the true pace of the bodies? And whatever depth of intimacy is being shared, and a commitment to never participate in anything that is 1% or more faster. So learn that level of attunement and further to one's own body. Yeah, learning to relate to sex in a way that is built for healing. That sexuality can become this incredibly powerful space of healing, which I feel like I've kind of been initiated into by certain great women that I've had sexual connections with and relationships with over time. And, you know, one in particular, I can remember just the way that she made it normal in our sexuality to, if there was anything that was coming up, you know, I have a crazy mind that does crazy stuff sometimes. And I think all of us have crazy minds that go into all sorts of, you know, I'm in something right now, or you're in something right now, whatever. And just the practice of being able to share, you know, just like, hey, actually, I noticed that I'm with something right now, or I've had a fear come up right now, or I've got a story coming up right now around whether you're really with me in this place, or, you know, whatever. And just having a culture in any moment, no matter how intense and sweaty and gorgeous or how soft or whatever, to be able to just take a moment, and that being so welcome, you know, and 100 other things like this, you know, and that contribute to sexuality being such a powerfully healing space, such a powerfully nourishing space. Yeah, such a catalytic space for our souls as well. And I've come to feel more and more, I noticed recently how I feel like also around self-pleasure, for instance, like the way that we relate to our own practice of self-pleasure is a fundamental doorway for the marriage of my own soul with my own body, which we never encounter or really connect with as long as my self-pleasure is running through some kind of head thing, you know. And yeah, many times in my spiritual path, I feel like I've recognized that life and the human body and our constitution is just built in a certain way that the most intimate mysteries of it all are in the closest places, you know, waiting for us to discover the most foundational, closest places, whether it's just the awareness that's ever present now and what that really is, or whether it's, you know, the basic initiations of being in a human body, which is that you're going to be born, you're going to love some beings, some are going to stay, some are going to go. People are going to die. Maybe you're going to have kids, maybe you're not, and your body's going to die at the end. Wow. That's just, and then, yeah, just with self-pleasure or sexuality, that if we can really be present with just the basic sensory experience of what's moving without layering it with all sorts of stories and projections and identities and so on, then we realize that there's a fucking tidal flow of love and pleasure in our bodies that's waiting to heal us and call us home, you know. It's like, sometimes I think about, you know, the evangelicals who go and knock on people's door or whatever, and then, you know, just people open the door and they're like, have you heard the good news? You know, they want to tell the good news of the gospel story. And I think there's so many things like this, which are such good news. You know?
Right.
Like, do we know the good news of self-pleasure? Do we know the good news of just the basic realities of the human heart and awareness?
Yeah. And what comes as you're sharing that is this piece around, you know, stepping into the unknown and the mind's perception of stepping into the unknown. Like the mind will be like, okay, I want to go and I'm ready to go. Okay, yes, I understand I need to go into the unknown. I'm going to go into the unknown. And so the mind has this understanding of it. And the mind then starts to seek, like, okay, where can I go into the unknown? Like, is this the unknown? And really, you know, in reflection of your conversation and in reflection of the shift from the agenda and the identity into the softening and the surrendering of what, you know, the eros and what moves through the body, that is like, it's that shift that moves into the unknown. And so that unknown moves through in those very small sensate pieces in the body, you know, when you surrender to the eros. And it is not from the mind recognizing, okay, Joe Dispenza said I have to go into the unknown, so I'm going to go into the unknown, because it is a disconnect, you know, because really the tremble starts to come because the mind will prepare, like, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm ready. But it's when it actually becomes embodied that tremble starts to come, and then it's like, oh, like what, you're kind of in it, and you're not really, you know, you're just moving in it then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how glorious, right? How glorious. I know those moments in my own experience where there's some part of me that's like, fuck, I'm actually just in my experience, you know. and another part is like, oh my God, thank God, you know.
Yes,
how terrifying and how glorious all at once. You know?
Right, exactly. Yeah, beautiful.
And in that moment as well, I think there's critical lessons that we have the opportunity to learn around our own boundaries, because, you know, there is more ego identity that can come in around like, right, the mission is open to the unknown now. I'm going to take it all the way, you know? And I think I was really guilty of that, which is like, I got broken open more and more. And then was like, okay, we're going to do this, you know? And then I actually just created more trauma in my own system because I crossed my own boundaries and, you know, and created more drama in certain situations. So part of the humbling is also accepting, that this is going to take as long as it takes.
Right.
And that's okay. And actually, whatever our time is the right time. And you know, all of these dilemmas, every single one of the choice points like this, ask us, are you willing to let love be your operating system rather than identity and agenda and personality? And because, you know, as long as I'm in some part of me that's like, I've got to finish this, got to complete this, got to get to where I'm going, or Joe Dispenza said, or whatever.
Right.
It's just more ego. It's just more personality. And our souls have time. They want to grow, they want to deepen, they want to become embodied, and they want to flow their love through everything. And the soul isn't like sitting there anxiously and urgently, like, got to get this done. It's not the way it works. So yeah, just even like the profound lessons that can come with just accepting your own boundaries. Like, okay, I've come as far as I can come right now. And I need to pause, and I need to breathe, reset, feel myself, and then I'll probably be available for more, whether it's connection, expansion of myself, or connection with someone else, or some form of intimacy.
Yeah. And I just want to bring one other piece up before we close around the conversation that you were sharing in your relationship, and the different frequencies of love, and the frequency of love that you felt when you were in your identity, and where your mind was probably, I'm assuming, at like, I'm looking for more intimacy. Like the mind was probably in that direction, and you were in that identity, and then feeling what your body felt, and that frequency of love, and then the different frequency of love when you were connected more to moving through in that soul piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a both and ultimately that I feel like we need to get to, which is I ask of myself that I've gone so deeply into my identity that first of all, my identity isn't built of something in my mind. That my identity is built in who I know I am in my core. And I know there that nothing can ever harm that. Nothing can ever take that. No, whatever happens, it doesn't affect that ultimately, no matter how neurotic or terrified my mind might be in this or that situation, but really nothing ever harms that. And yeah, like the ability to be, I've had this journey, like learning this journey in a male body, the ability to show up in a way that in intimacy that is broken open in my heart and available to participate in intimacy through every cell of my body. And that is also connected to my power. And it is also connected to the power in this body, and is connected to the life force in this body, and trusts that, and can also play, can be both deeply receptive and also penetrative in my presence and in my heart and in my body as well. And, it's like all these pieces together, I feel. But yeah, unless there is the humbling and the breaking open, the rest doesn't come.
Would you like to leave us with any thoughts or any pieces as we close out here today?
I just say I really appreciate what you do. I really appreciate the impulse to hold a point for a deepening and evolution of the way human beings do intimacy. So I'm grateful to you in your leadership and your stewardship of this. And thank you for a fun and sweet conversation.
Yeah, so thank you. And looking forward to having you on board in this next cohort. Yeah,
my pleasure.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
Thank you for tuning in to the New Paradigm Intimacy podcast. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Willis, and I am your host and owner of the Institute New Paradigm Intimacy. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and found it both activated and vibrated in your body. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Apple and Spotify and leave us a review. It really helps us out. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at New Paradigm Intimacy. For behind-the-scenes content and enrollment notifications for our graduate self-pleasure modality certification course, and more tips as we bring pioneering approaches to sex, business, and relating. Have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions? We'd love to hear from you. Drop a message on any of our social platforms. Until next time, keep exploring your edges in pleasure and leaning into what it means for you to be a part of the cutting edge of sexual evolution.